broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. We are going to give it just a moment here to let folks join, but thank you so much for being on the line today. Okay, so it is 1:01 Eastern time, so I will go ahead and kick us off, and as folks join, they will join in on the conversation. So thank you again, everyone, for joining today. We're very, very excited to be launching the new IRIS Plus and Navigating Impact Clean Energy theme. I am joined by the Sustainable Finance Institute, Todd Cort and Cary Krosinksy, and I will do introductions and all of that good stuff in just a moment here. I'll give a few housekeeping notes and then we'll dive right in. So first of all, if you could please, I know everyone is muted upon entering the session, but if you could please keep yourselves muted if you're not speaking, just to preserve the audio quality here. And next, we are recording this session, so just so everybody knows, just so folks who were not able to join today can view the session later. And also at the end of the session today, we will have an opportunity for Q&A. So if you do have any questions for the GIIN or for our panelists and partner today at the Sustainable Finance Institute, please feel free to use the questions section of that panel that you should see on your screen to ask questions, and then we'll get to as many as possible at the end here. And with that, we'll start the show here. And first, I mentioned that Cary Krosinksy and Todd Cort are on the line here representing the Sustainable Finance Institute. And I want to give a very, very big thank you to Todd and Cary, who helped us develop this theme, partnered with us throughout the whole process here. They have been wonderful partners, and I'm thrilled that we're on the line together launching this to the market. And I'll do a little bit more of an introduction of the Sustainable Finance Institute and let Cary and Todd introduce themselves as well. But also thank you to those on the line who were part of this theme development. So quite a few of you I know joining today have been with us over the last 6+ months developing this theme. So just a thank you to everyone who has been involved. And with that, this is the agenda for today. So we'll go into more introductions and background on the process of navigating impact, the GIIN and Sustainable Finance Institute. We will then give an introduction to the clean energy theme and then dive right into the strategic goals summary, so what has actually been developed over the last 6+ months, and then a metrics summary of all of the clean energy goals as well. And as I mentioned, please do use that questions box to submit your questions for the speakers today. All right. And with that, a quick introduction to the Global Impact Investing Network, or the GIIN. So the GIIN, we are the global champion of impact investing and are dedicated to increasing the scale and effectiveness of impact investing around the world. And we do that through a number of activities, including building a community of practice, including providing tools and guidance to the impact investing community, and publishing data, evidence, and insights around impact investing as well. And this project today that we will be launching and talking about kind of sits squarely in the providing tools, evidence, and resources to help investors identify and manage their impact. So we're very, very excited to be launching this theme and revealing what we have done in terms of clean energy in the system. And next, I'll actually let Cary, would you like to jump in here and do a quick introduction of perhaps yourself and the Sustainable Finance Institute, and then Todd, I'll ask you to do the same for yourself after Cary.
Sure. Thank you, Grace. Great to be with you all. And it's such a honor and privilege to be partnered with the Global Impact Investing Network. The work's so important, as I'm sure you all know. SFI is an independent think tank that is accelerating global sustainable finance uptake in regions such as Asia and also on energy. So I think we've made ideal partners for this process, and it's been very rewarding to put that together. We hosted our first event actually in China on the future of sustainable finance in 2019, produced a book on the subject last year, encouraging more cooperation to solve sustainability challenges and impact challenges on the ground in the developing world where the need is so acute. We've actually also partnered with CSI, China's main index provider, to build a better ESG framework, what we're calling ESG Plus. We've launched a CSFA Certified Sustainable Financial Analyst designation, and we have expertise in hydrogen and partner with other institutions ourselves in other ways. But so we are excited to be partnered with the GIIN on the clean energy theme. We look forward to going over that with you.
And Todd, I will ask you to jump in and just do a quick introduction of yourself, if you don't mind.
Sure. I'm Todd Cort. I'm one of the advisors and members of the SFI. I'm also a faculty member at the Yale University School of Management, and I co-direct a couple of centers there, the Center for Business Environment and the Yale's Initiative on Sustainable Finance, which many of you have probably just recently gotten an email from, inviting you to our free webinar or symposium in about a month. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure working with the GIIN around the metrics development, which I'll speak to in a little bit. But thank you, Grace, for having us.
Awesome, thank you both. And I'll give a quick introduction to Iris Plus, but I realized I overlooked introducing myself to folks on the line, although many of you again have been involved in this theme development. But quick introduction of myself. My name is Grace Earle, and I am a senior associate here at the GIIN on the Iris Plus and IMM team. So again, thrilled to have worked on developing the content and the metrics that are in this new clean energy theme. And with those introductions kind of out of the way, I will give an introduction to Iris Plus and where this work will eventually live, and then give an idea of the navigating impact process and the timeline in which this work will be introduced into Iris Plus. So Iris Plus is the generally accepted system for measuring, managing, and optimizing impact. And Iris Plus gives investors the tools they need to translate impact goals into real results. And the features that you will see on your screen here are exactly what we have developed for the new clean energy theme and strategic goals. So within each of the new strategic goals under the clean energy theme, there is a core metric set. So short lists of key indicators that help investors and organizations and companies track towards impact goals. We also, behind those core metric sets, have a full catalog of metrics that has been built over the last decade plus. So starting in 2009, we started to build a catalog of metrics upon which the Iris Plus system is built. Additionally, there's an evidence base that helps to tie those activities within the strategic goal overviews and sort of activities associated with the strategic goals to the intended impacts and outcomes. So there's a built-in evidence base for each theme. Additionally, there's guidance that helps investors implement the information within their IMM practice. Standards alignment, which we'll talk about a little bit more in depth on the next page. And of course, this is a free and public good. So Iris Plus, one of the main challenges as expressed by investors is that there are lots and lots of IMM frameworks and tools and standards that can be used to help you track your impact. And Iris Plus aims to create a system that is framework agnostic and can actually be used with any standard or proprietary framework, and is aligned to over 50 standards and industry frameworks. So here you see just an example of a few that Iris Plus can be used with, and investors use Iris Plus with these commonly used frameworks. Additionally, Iris Plus was created to help solve this need, again, as expressed by investors, to create a standardized way in which to track impact. And in order to do this, we need to consult many stakeholders to ensure that the information that is in the system is, not only accurate and robust, but actually, helpful and usable in creating an IMM practice and optimizing an IMM practice, and of course, optimizing your impact. So with that, we have consulted over 1,600 stakeholders at this point to develop the Iris Plus system and the information that exists in the system and the information that you will see today. And for the clean energy theme specifically, there were about right at 150, low 150s, I think it might have been exactly 150 stakeholders that have been involved, and you can see a sampling here of those expert stakeholders that we do involve and engage with to create the content to create the theme specific content. So here are a few examples of investors and others that have been involved in the clean energy theme. And this is very exciting for a number of reasons, but one of them is that Iris Plus, since we launched in May of 2019, we've seen quite a great uptick in adoption. So investors around the world have used Iris Plus. You can see some of the numbers here, the global numbers. We, as of July, as of Q2 this year, we have seen over 200,000 users visit Iris Plus globally. So that's very exciting, and very exciting to be able to give users strategic goals and tools that they can use around clean energy. And there are not, Iris Plus is used by investors, but there are also quite a few other stakeholders that do use the system. So again, globally and across different themes and stakeholders, we're excited that folks will be able to get access to this new clean energy content. Next, we are in development of Iris Plus is in kind of constant development for now anyway. And on the screen here, you can see all of the ongoing development of Iris Plus themes. So in Iris Plus, you can view a number of themes, some sampled here. You can see that at the moment we are in development for a few themes, including clean energy, of course. But this is to say that we are constantly evolving the system and adding in information based on investor need. And again, in consultation with investors. And with that, I'll get a little bit more specific about where we're at today. So today marks a really big milestone in the theme development for clean energy. And this gives you a little bit of an idea of the high-level process of engaging stakeholders and launching new content in Iris Plus and where we are today. So the Navigating Impact project is the process in which we engage stakeholders. Again, many of you have been involved in this process for the clean energy theme. We engage stakeholders to prioritize themes and strategic goals to be built out. We then, scope and research and build upon the expertise of this expert working group to build out those core metric sets, evidence, overviews, etc. And then we go into a drafting and consulting phase of really refining these strategic goals and before they launch into a broader public comment period. And in order to launch into that public comment period, we make them live on the Navigating Impact project site. So that is where we are today, and very excited to share the new themes with you and move this into kind of out of the prototyping stage and getting into the refinement stage to launch this to a broader audience. And the Navigating Impact project, again, as you saw on the previous screen, is this process that happens before themes are launched in Iris Plus and before they are shown to the wider industry for comment. And so really the role of the Navigating Impact project and the work that has been done over the past or so months has been to document these common strategic goals under a specific theme. So you will see those strategic goals that I've been referencing in just a moment. And those, again, include those core metric sets, curated resources, evidence, etc., all to help investors with their IMM strategy and practice. Additionally, and it's especially maybe relevant for this goal. I know it came up a lot in the working group conversations about these strategic goals being used in combination with others. But that's a note for the whole IRIS Plus system that strategic goals can be used individually or in combination according to the context. So in this case, investors did express, wanting to use these goals in combination with each other or others that are in the system, and that's just to say they all are meant to be used in combination with others if it suits your needs. Additionally, we do allow for a bit of customization within the core metric set. So if you would like to add a metric from the IRIS catalog, for example, into your framework, IRIS Plus allows for that flexibility as well. And these strategic goals are meant to be a really robust starting point for the main investor impact goals under a specific theme. And with that introduction, so we're kind of what's the GIIN, what's SF5, introductions, where we are in the process, and now is the big reveal, if you will, of the goals that have been developed. And I will pass it off now to Cary to introduce the goals, talk a little bit about what each one entails and why it's so important at this moment.
Great, thank you, Grace. Yeah, so as we've gone through this process, 4 strategic goals emerged as directly relevant and that needed to be captured. So the first one involves storage. This has long been a barrier to uptake in shifting the energy mix. So strategic goal number 1 is increasing clean energy storage capacity through improved batteries and other technologies. That includes improving energy storage technologies and infrastructure to support the global transition to clean energy as it pertains to storage. Why does that matter? A major problem does involve hindering this 100% clean energy longer-term goal. It addresses the intermittency of variable renewable energy sources like wind and solar. Sometimes the wind isn't blowing, sometimes the sun isn't out every day. So these things naturally fluctuate, and therefore storage is essential for ramping up renewable energy. We're going to give you a brief investment example. There are certainly many in each of these goals. One example would be Gore Street Capital, which established the Gore Street Energy Storage Fund. So that's a specific fund on the subject. Obviously, storage is a component of other impact-focused funds that look to clean energy. This is a diversified portfolio of fully developed utility-scale energy storage projects, primarily in the UK and Ireland. And in last year, they exported a total of 3,000 megawatt hours of electricity to the grid and saved consumers 400 megawatt hours during the winter season period of peak system demand. And they're actually having major issues in the UK with energy and costs as we speak. So investments in that part of the world only figure to become more important. There's certainly many other examples that we could have cited. That's just one illustrative example. To the next goal. The second goal, perhaps obviously enough, would be separately from storage, batteries being critical. Also, the transmission and distribution of clean energy is a strategically important goal as well. Improving transmission and distribution infrastructure, investments that align with that goal are aimed to improve transmission and distribution, supporting the global transition to clean energy. And it's important because the transition faces 2 primary challenges: adequate distribution of generation. It also helps with the issue of intermittency, and investments in improved T&D infrastructure also can directly help alleviate current challenges. And so how do we actually understand when we're making progress in this area is core to what we researched and will be on the Navigating Impact platform. I don't know if it's okay to call it a platform. I always think of it as a platform. I realize it's officially a project. But one illustrative investment would be Spark Meter, which provides smart electricity meters, custom analytics, and grid management services for developing world microgrid and distribution utilities. Their solution could mitigate more than 2.5 gigatons of carbon by 2050. That's a lot. Spark Meter has sold over 150,000 such meters in 25 countries in the developing world. So again, there would be many other examples of the efficiency of distribution and transmission that could be cited as well. To the third goal, perhaps the most obvious would be the generation of clean energy itself, increasing clean energy generation through both low and zero carbon alternatives, a key component certainly of any net zero commitment that an investor might make. So what's included would be very specific instances of investment to accelerate the generation of clean energy directly. Why does this matter? Despite falling costs, sources of clean energy are not necessarily being adopted at the rates necessary to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, increase what the climate scientists are telling us is necessary to avoid all sorts of calamities. So, we're certainly not suggesting that clean energy is the only area of the SDGs that needs to be solved for. There's many other across the impact spectrum, but this one gets right to the heart of one of the most important goals that we face, adequately shifting the energy mix towards lower carbon options and generating those electrons that are clean. So there are barriers to increasing these energy mixes as might seem to be required. That includes low-cost natural gas, reliance on government subsidies or a similar support that might go away, high capital costs, and regulatory hurdles related to specific projects. And an example of one of many, obviously, would be Intersect Power, a developer of utility-scale renewable energy, which has an $8 billion U.S. portfolio of more than 60 projects in all phases of development, including a significant amount of solar. One would suspect that the work of TPG Climate would be another example where you're going to see a reasonable percentage of renewable energy investment being featured in what is, I think, now the largest impact fund that's dedicated to climate by some measures. And you're seeing they've capped that at $7 billion, so we're aware of other large institutions building similar funds. So there will be many examples in this category, and it will become a global dynamic and a big opportunity for investors. So to capture this correctly and allow for making sure that the impact is being demonstrated with the dollars being invested is so critical. And then the last, the final and not the least important goal is an interesting one, which there's some overlap, I guess, to the other more specific themes in IRIS Plus that pertain to access. But we wanted to make sure we highlighted the importance of improving access to clean energy for underserved communities around the world. We actually had Secretary Cary speak to our Yale class in 2019. He talked to the imperative of ramping up renewable energy, specifically in the developing world. So this is a really important strategic goal. Somewhat in here is the just transition concept, and we looked at that quite closely, I should say, but we didn't find literally any investment case studies. There's some great literature out of the London School of Economics, and my friend Nick Robbins, who's been helping champion this, but we're not seeing the specific investor case studies to cite quite yet. But what is included in this goal are investments aligned with directly providing underserved and energy impoverished communities with access to clean and affordable energy as part of a broader effort to ensure the just energy transition. This is actually directly towards SDG number 7, by the way, affordable and clean energy by 2030. Economically excluded groups don't always have access to the funding necessary to make this leapfrogging that might otherwise be necessary, despite other advancements that we see. So a roadmap for economy-wide decarbonization really has to prioritize ways to make this happen through plans, policies, investments that seek to eradicate energy poverty through green and affordable energy for all. Otherwise, we'll solve energy poverty in ways that are damaging to the climate. So this is a big opportunity, and there are many examples. Arcadia provides solar energy, for example, to households that cannot afford to put solar panels on their roof. And they're working with 2,500 homes in partnership with solar developers with around 12 kilowatts in installed capacity. Really important area to focus on, and we're thrilled to have worked with the GIIN on codifying these 4 goals. We look forward to your further feedback. And I think with the next slide, we'll turn things over to someone I think is one of the world's leading experts on sustainability metrics, my partner, Todd Cort.
Thanks, Cary. Flip to the next one. I'm going to take this quick opportunity. People see you can drop questions into the webinar. So I think I'll go through the metrics a little deliberately, and then we can take some time for the latter part of the webinar to go over those questions. So please throw them in if you have any. So everyone here knows the metrics development and impact investing are as a balance of several factors. So what we're looking for is measurement against each of the strategic goals across input, output, and outcome aspects where we can develop them. We're balancing that against feasibility, and we're balancing that against comparability, so we can get the greatest number of investor metrics across the board. So to the first strategic goal, storage capacity, what we're really interested in is both the amount of storage capacity that is created, but also the performance of that storage capacity. So you'll see that reflected in the metrics that we have. On the input side, we have the amount of energy storage capacity added. On the performance side, we've got several metrics that we've identified. We have the energy stored specifically from renewables, which is more on the outcome side. We have the discharge and the discharge rate as assessments of performance. And we have the life cycle assessment on the storage device as another measure of performance. And finally, after going through many outcomes, the stakeholders landed on kind of the most critical one as the core metric, which is the amount of greenhouse gas emissions avoided or reduced. So we focused in our outcome on that specific metric. So those are the energy storage metrics. On the second strategic goal, you can click again, thank you. On transmission distribution, as Cary alluded to, there's a number of potential benefits associated with transmission distribution. So the first level, there is energy efficiency and loss of energy through the transmission and distribution system. So we want to capture that. At the second level, there is the enablement of green energy development as a result of distribution and transmission. And at a third level, there's the enablement of access to electricity by the end user as a result of transmission and distribution. So you can see our core metrics tackle those 3 benefits accordingly. So we have the basic one, the input metric around the transmission capacity added, and the capacity. Then we look at the enablement of green energy, and we ask about capacity added for renewable energies in particular. And there's a great deal of nuance behind that that maybe we can pick up in the questions period. Again, our output metric is around greenhouse gas emissions avoided, and we wanted to have an access metric in as well. So we have we have client households that have been provided new access as a result of the transmission and distribution investment. So those are our focus areas for the core metrics on transmission and distribution. In the third area, which is generation, the fundamental strategic goal, these are very traditional metrics for generation, so they should look familiar to any of you who are in the field. We have the amount generated, again, obviously renewable energy generated. It is technology ambivalent, or agnostic, as long as the electrons are carbon free. Then we have the output and outcome metrics. So we have the greenhouse gas emissions avoided and reduced. We also have a total greenhouse gas emissions metric. This is mostly for comparability and meeting that criteria. And finally, we have the energy generated for use, trying to get a little bit to the output of the technology as well. So those are fairly straightforward, I think. And then the final one, probably the most multifaceted of our strategic goals is access to clean energy. So you can see we split this down into two major categories of metrics. So we have a metric around spending, and the premise here from the stakeholder group was that access is predominantly driven by one of two factors. It's either driven by economic inability to purchase electricity or to access electricity, and or the physical inability to access electricity. We covered the physical inability to access electricity through the transmission distribution. So we left that there. So here in the clean energy, we focused in on the client spending element of access. So we asked the basic metric of client spending on energy. This is very much an outcome metric. This is intended to identify what is the benefit accrued to people on the network as a result of the investment. And we ask for two specific demographics, or two specific categories within that. So we ask for a stakeholder socioeconomic and a stakeholder demographic organization of that impact. The idea here is to kind of acknowledge that the lack of access under current scenarios is skewed away from certain populations. So the demographics is looking in particular at racial, cultural, gender breakouts of demographics, because some groups have lower access today than others. And the socioeconomic refers specifically to those people who are have less economic means. We want to understand the access that's generated in those groups in particular. We use the same buckets for the second category here under the energy generated for sale. So this is the input metric side. So we're asking how much renewable energy is created for sale, again, broken out by the customers, and where those customers sit, either in a demographic or a socioeconomic bucket. So those are the two core metrics that we settled in on for access to clean energy. Understanding that there are a number of other metrics that sit within and underneath those that can add additional nuance. Let me open up and see them. So I'm going to pause there, but maybe we should leave this slide up so people can continue to digest these, because I went through them maybe a little quickly, and see if any questions pop up before we open it up to the overall conversation. I see one question.
Todd, there was a question or something I would love for you to elaborate on as well, and especially when it came to the metrics, and you alluded to there being some nuance, especially in the transmission and distribution behind the renewable energy connected to the grid, and there are other nuances behind the other metrics as well. So I'm wondering if you can speak to some of those nuances and maybe tensions that arose during the stakeholder engagement developing these themes, or generally tensions that exist within the clean energy metrics space that folks can be aware of and discuss a bit.
Sure, and you two feel free to chime in. So there are additional metrics under each of these strategic goal areas. These are the core metrics that we wanted to focus on and bring to the forefront. So some of the trade-offs and nuances that arose during the stakeholder engagement. For example, there was one of the conversations that was had was, is access a separate category? And how would we measure that? So for example, you could conceive of access being, instead of its own strategic goal, it could be embedded into the other three strategic goals. So we can embed access into transmission distribution infrastructure. We can embed it into clean energy generation as additional metrics. One of the reasons we pulled it out as its own not isolated, but its own strategic goal is first because we wanted to emphasize it, or our stakeholders wanted to emphasize it as its own goal. But second, because if we embed access into the other strategic goals, it would tend to be an additional indicator as opposed to core. And we didn't want that to be the case, or our stakeholders didn't want that to be the case. So in some ways, this is a little awkward, because there is no access without the other three strategic goals. There's no increased access without transmission and distribution. There's no increased access without additional generation. And so there's a little bit of an awkwardness in that it is a dependent or interdependent strategic goal, and is held out as its own strategic goal. Another nuance that came up during the discussions on the metric side was, do we include specific categories for other technologies that enable green energy? So for example, smart grid metering technology. Do we include that as its own strategic goal? Do we include building systems that create energy efficiency, which, because they create energy efficiency, they reduce load on the grid, which then enables greater creation of green energy, because we're less dependent on peaking, et cetera. So this technology question, or enabling technology question, came up several times on the stakeholder calls. At the end of the day, we didn't feel like we were in a position to understand every possible technology that would create or enable clean energy. And so we didn't think that it was feasible or even responsible to try to identify every single technology. And most of the technologies within the categories that we've identified. They're either an efficiency measure, a generation measure, or a transmission distribution. So if I take, for example, green energy or clean, more efficient building technology that enables more efficient grid distribution, you could say type technology, because it's creating additional capacity in the grid. So there's some uncomfortable fits here, but it is at the it's because we had to we're trying to not do a crystal ball on what technologies are going to be available or are currently available, and then really boil the ocean around those, but rather just kind of stick to the top level frameworks where most of those technologies would fit. Cary, any other nuances that you recall from the stakeholder discussions?
Yeah, for me, the main takeaways are the ones you covered, especially this idea of enabling technologies being, I think, something that the GIIN is also covering in other themes, if I recall, Grace.
Yeah, so it's well, I can go into a little bit more detail too, but this is a great kind of making the case for why these goals, and the fact that these goals are set up in such a way that they can be used in combination with one another, and are the delivery mechanisms, or the actual investments sit within the larger impact goals, right? And the strategic goals you can think of as an impact goal as well. So in a way, yes, the enabling technologies, depending on that larger impact goal, and kind of to Todd's point, that many of the enabling technologies that were brought up by the group fit into these larger impact goals. So the impact can be tracked using these frameworks as well. But yes, so longer answer to your question. The shorter one is yes.
So I see. So there's three questions here. I think the first question is probably for you, Cary, but I want to take on the second two, not quickly, but I want to take on the second two. So one is from Aritra around the greenhouse gas emissions life cycle question. So the question is, when we ask how many greenhouse gas emissions are avoided as a result of the generation, one measurement of that would be, based on the grid where that renewable energy is placed, what is the replacement rate on the carbon emissions, right? If I replace a pure coal-fired power grid, then I would have a significant decrease in greenhouse gas emissions as a result. The second way to interpret that is the life cycle, which means that the production of the solar panels, for example, has some greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. This metric is defined as the replacement of the grid. So this is not a life cycle metric for the full production of the solar panel or whatever the technology is. However, there's an additional metric that we've suggested around life cycle emissions that investors can plug into if they're interested. But this one refers to, when you read the definition, this refers to the replacement of the emissions on the grid. So that's a really good question. And then the second question that I'll tackle from Darnley asks about the distinction between the energy generated for sale and the energy generated for use. So this is the distinction between the output and the final end product. So we're trying to distinguish between how much energy is, how much capacity is created, and then how much energy is delivered for sale. And on the sale side, we also have the additional unit where there's a dollar sign associated with it. So that, because when we're talking about sale as a function of access, we want to know what the price is of that energy and how that price is differentiated within the market to create access. So there's a couple of nuances between those two.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Todd was just talking about when it comes to the emission of the storage, the life cycle emissions of the storage technology, and then maybe answer the third question briefly that we had. Yeah, I'm actually an advisor to a company involved in the potential for deep sea mining of the materials that will be necessary for the low carbon transition. The world is going to need more cobalt, copper, manganese, high quality nickel, for example, to create 500 million electric vehicles, for example, in the next short period of time. Where will those materials come from? Will they come from Russia or Indonesian rainforests? Or is it possible to have a much lower impact creating these technologies using materials that are more environmentally efficient, environmentally positive manner? And it's work in progress. So I think it's something to watch as we move forward when it comes to how can we be more efficient in the life cycle emissions of any transition technology as something to consider for future evolutions of this theme. So I just wanted to add to that. So that's definitely something to look at. Although there's always there are life cycle emissions of any technology, whether it's traditional or otherwise. So there's also a question as to whether business as usual is different in a meaningful way from the new solution. But it is an important consideration. So thanks for that question. And then for the first question that came from Eritrea, I think one of the things we've been soliciting from the advisory groups who've been advising us is to provide more illustrative examples that we can capture. So we would encourage you to provide details to Grace and her team at the GIIN, who can see, with our help or even subsequently, if there are additional case studies that we can feature. And I think that's that's always been an open feedback category for participants, and I think that will remain, is my understanding.
Yeah, it will remain, and please do. I'll share a bit more about how folks on the line can get involved in general. I'm also happy. I'll pop an email address into the chat too. Feel free to send illustrative examples directly to me if you'd like. But yes, appreciate any and all feedback. And one that reminds me that we talked about this piece, the stakeholder engagement, and that we'll talk about next steps, but this falls right into our next step from this, and that is launching into a public comment period for which we will their comment. So definitely watch out for that too, and another place to get involved or send over illustrative investments, etc. Great. And I think, so one other question that I would like to pose to you, Cary and Todd, is why now? Why should investors care about this, reference clean energy from an impact perspective? Not just from the, I suppose, traditional sort of ESG factors. But why now, and what problem is this helping to solve at the moment from your perspective and from your engagement with investors?
Maybe I'll take a first pass at that, but Todd, I'll be curious to see what you have to say also. We're in a really interesting moment, whether it is accelerating net zero commitments from not only investors, asset owners, but corporations, but also increasingly, and I think understandably in some ways, there are not only concerns about greenwashing, but also an ongoing SEC investigation into the former Deutsche Bank DWS into greenwashing accusations of a previous employee. Whether accurate or there's follow-up or not, on that news, DWS went down over 10%, just on the news that the SEC was investigating greenwashing. Anything 10% or more of a stock price, and that stock price stayed down for quite some time after that news came out. Anything that's 10% or more of a stock price is both strategic and material. So, even if you don't believe we need to do more clean energy, it's now extremely important not only to invest in all categories of impact and help accelerate the progress that we seek, but also to do so with legitimacy. And when I teach, I'm always using the Navigating Impact project as a source. And so I think it's an enormously big opportunity for the GIIN to have provided this body of work that investors of all kinds, asset owners and fund managers, can use to prove that they're going after these challenges with legitimacy.
I'll just add a little bit. I usually think of these metrics in terms of how much financial benefit they create for the issuer, and that can be challenging sometimes. But there's two avenues that we need to at least think about. So the one avenue is the one that we've been talking about for years now, which is if we can demonstrate impact and targeting of the investment, does that give us credit in either the primary or secondary markets? And there's a varying amount of evidence and discord and dissonance around whether that is the case. But there doesn't seem to be any evidence that measuring the impact associated with the investment is detrimental. That it has a huge cost of, adds a huge cost to the issuance. That investors would punish anyone as a result of having these kinds of impact investments. So there's kind of a potential upside on the markets, in markets, and essentially no downside, it appears. And then the other note that's a little bit more concrete that's coming out now is particularly when we think about access. So remember that all of these strategic goals have access elements to them. That governments in the OECD countries, actually and beyond, into emerging markets as well, are starting to regulate around or incentivize around energy development with a lens on access. So if you can demonstrate access, it seems that regulation is moving in that direction. Here in the US, we're sitting on a potentially enormous infrastructure bill, and all the energy infrastructure investment that is being laid out is going to have a lens of access on it. The administration has identified a task force on energy justice. They're going to be looking at all applications with an eye towards how much access it creates in those specific buckets we've identified, demographic and socioeconomic buckets. So in terms of non-market forces, regulation, permitting, incentives from governments, et cetera, it seems pretty clear that these four strategic goals are going to align pretty well with that. So I imagine that for most investors working in most markets, they're going to want to measure these anyway as a result of incentives coming out of governments.
And with that as well, so one point that came up earlier, and Cary, you alluded to our discussion and decisions made around addressing the just transition to clean energy. And I'm happy to elaborate on this a bit as well in terms of how this again speaks to the sort of crossover or using combination nature of the strategic goals and how we kind of addressed and thought about the just transition. But given what Todd just said and generally the appetite from investors to want to address this. Can you elaborate a bit about how we did think about that, and I can talk a little bit too about where parts of the just transition, such as quality jobs, may kind of show up in the IRIS Plus system. But would love for you to elaborate a bit on how we maybe thought about that.
Sure, thanks, Grace. Yeah, for a while we were thinking the just transition would be a strategic goal itself. That was certainly what we were encouraged to do during the process, and what we believed would be useful. And you hear about it in the discourse. And I'll refer again, my friend Nick Robbins, who's been one of the original champions of this work in recent years, which I thought was a new phrase. By the way, it's on the first page of Paul Hawken's Natural Capitalism book, the phrase just transition. So it's been around for a while, actually, which was a recent discovery. But in looking through for the case studies, the specific investor case studies, we just didn't find any. We did find quite a few corporate case studies. There's definitely a lot of focus on corporates providing specific just transition case studies, and that's what the London School of Economics recent report, which said it on title that it was about investor case studies, but it was not. It was other examples of the just transition, specifically corporations and what they're doing. So yes, investors can encourage companies to do more of that work, but that wasn't what we were looking for. We were looking for directly investable solutions in the just transition. So, I mean, I would imagine it's an open door on that being its own strategic goal at some point, but we wanted to at least capture the access side of the just transition, and that's how our thinking evolved through this process.
Yeah. Oh, Todd, were you going to jump in? No. Okay. I was just going to mention, and Cary speaking of how we kind of split out the access, and one other piece of this discussion, in addition to what Cary just mentioned, is that there are quite a few pieces to the just transition as a concept, right? So involving the communities most impacted, ensuring health impacts are taken into consideration, and detrimental impacts are mitigated, that jobs are considered, quality jobs are considered. So it's also quite a bit of, there are many pieces of it, and some of those pieces have been investable and shown that investors are working towards those strategic goals, such as quality jobs. So I'm again calling out the fact that there are other strategic goals within IRIS Plus that I hope, if they are relevant to you, or you're interested in taking a look and are on the line, you do so. For example, under our quality jobs theme, there is a strategic goal titled Improving Job Skills for the Future, where we're kind of thinking about green jobs, and that's a piece of the just transition. So just noting these pieces show up a bit throughout the system, and especially wanted to make that clear, as it's very important, and our stakeholders also were reiterating how important this was. So and with that, so I'm seeing if there are any final questions, but I'm also conscious of time. We're down to about 5 minutes. Oh, yeah.
Can I jump in with? I misspoke earlier when I was answering Richa's question. I said that the total greenhouse gas emissions, the life cycle emissions, was in the additional metrics. It's not. It's in the core metrics. So it's there. Sorry. I just wanted to clarify that it was sitting right underneath where I was looking.
And with that too, I believe Lissa, and thank you, my colleagues, Lissa, Glasgow, and Calendoria are on the line, and have also been working hard on getting this theme ready to go. And also, Lissa, you see dropped in a few links in there. So the Navigating Impact link is in the chat if you haven't had a chance to take a look, where all the metrics live as well. And with these last few moments we have, I want to just ask Cary and Todd if you do have any final thoughts in terms of the development of this theme, or any learnings you're hoping to share, or the importance of these goals. And then we'll move on to how folks can continue to stay involved as this theme develops. So maybe I'll ask you first, Todd.
Sure. Final thoughts. I think that one of the key considerations for me in this development of these metrics, and I think for the stakeholder groups, was really about efficiency and feasibility. I think there's underlying all the impact assessments that while we want to understand the full suite of impacts, we also want to really accelerate this. I think everyone was kind of looking at this and saying this needs to go faster. And we don't want to get weighed down or bogged down in excessive metric development when we need to ramp up renewable energy very, very quickly. But at the same time, bearing in mind that it needs to be targeted. So hopefully that's kind of reflected, that there's a real emphasis on efficiency and feasibility of these metrics so that investors can get on with it, as it were. I think that might have been the term that was used in one of in the conversations.
Yeah, and for me, really quick, for me, the experience of developing this theme with you, Grace, and the GIIN and Todd, was how useful the process was. So the evolution of the goals and the feedback of stakeholders, the process I thought worked really well, and it allowed us, I think, to capture where we are and what needs to happen, and power up investors accordingly. So I think thanks again to the GIIN. We look forward to staying involved going forward. And yeah, for me, this was a validating experience that the process seems to work quite well in the development of themes for Iris+.
Great, thank you both for that, and that takes us into nicely our kind of a closing here and how to get involved. And we talked a little bit about the development of themes and how this clean energy theme came to be right now, or the launch on navigating impact for the clean energy theme. And we are in progress of building multiple themes, and there will be many upcoming themes built as well. So we would love for anyone who would like to get involved to get involved. So right at the moment, at the end of the month, end of the beginning of November, we'll be launching a public comment period for a few themes. So the sustainable agriculture, racial equity, biodiversity, and clean energy themes. And then we'll also be launching this expert working group for launch in the Navigating Impact Project for climate adaptation and resilience. So those are some of the themes that are kind of on the docket, and we would love folks to get involved in this expert working group, or just available for comment if you'd like. Additionally, if there is I want to learn more about Iris+ in general, we do have ongoing public demos of the system where we'll walk you through how to set up an impact framework based on a chosen strategic goal. So please check out the link there to sign up. And we also have several use cases and guidance pieces around Iris+, so showing real, very practical how-to cases of how to navigate the system and use Iris+ that are hopefully helpful in your impact practice as well. And the second bullet here is we also encourage folks to take a look at our recent publications on impact performance analyses. So we've launched some groundbreaking studies comparing impact performance across investments in 4 different sectors, and the link is there to get involved as well. And with that, I will again thank and say how grateful I am to have worked with Todd and Cary and the team on developing this theme. And we are very excited for everyone to take a look and stay with us and stay connected as we continue to develop this. And with that, I will say thank you to everyone for joining, and thank you, Cary and Todd, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you, Grace.
Thank you.